The observation deck window stretched 15 meters across, showing nothing but stars and the black void between them. Draker pressed one scaled hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep through. 15 cycles of work, thousands of hours of negotiation, and what did it amount to? Nothing. Less than nothing. The scale wings, Chitauri, and Lumini kept killing each other while Draker sat in this neutral station and watched. The dragon diplomat's reflection in the window looked wrong. Their scales had turned from brilliant emerald to something closer to pond scum. Their wings hung limp against their back instead of folded properly. Even their horns seemed duller, as if the failure had leached the shine from every part of them. 3 data tablets lay scattered on the floor near Draker's feet. One held messages from the Scale Wing Council, each one colder than the last. Another contained casualty reports from the latest border skirmish. The third held something worse, a letter of resignation that Draker had written this morning. Tomorrow, they would send it and go home in disgrace. Their family name, honored for 6 generations of diplomats, would become a joke. The clutch sibling who always mocked Draker's gentle nature would finally be proven right. Draker's claws trembled. They had tried everything. Formal negotiations with elaborate protocols, casual meetings over meals, video conferences and written proposals, shuttle diplomacy between the 3 homeworlds, appeals to history, to economics, to shared culture. Nothing worked. The Chitauri accused Draker of favoring the Scale Wings. The Lumini claimed Draker secretly worked for the Chitauri. The Scale Wings thought Draker had gone soft, contaminated by too much time with aliens that trying to serve everyone. Draker had earned the trust of no one. The deck doors hissed open. Draker did not turn around. Probably just another station resident coming to enjoy the view before it got crowded. Most people avoided this deck during the 3rd shift because Draker had claimed it as their personal brooding spot. Footsteps approached, heavy and uneven. Human steps, by the sound of them. One leg dragged slightly, creating an off-rhythm pattern. The steps stopped about 3 meters away. Draker waited for the human to leave or say something, but neither happened. Minutes passed. The human sat down in one of the chairs that lined the window. Draker heard the rustle of a bag, then the sound of eating. Simple, quiet chewing. No attempt at conversation. No questions about why a dragon diplomat sat alone in the dark. Draker finally glanced over. The human was older, maybe 50 or 60 by their species standards. Gray hair cut short. Wore clothes marked with grease and coolant stains. A maintenance worker, then. The human ate from a small container, something that looked like grain and vegetables mixed together. He stared out at the stars while he chewed, his face completely relaxed. This irritated Draker more than it should have. How dare this human sit here, looking so peaceful while Draker's world crumbled? How dare he eat calmly while 3 species died in a war Draker could not stop? But Draker said nothing. They turned back to the window and their own misery. The human finished eating, packed away his container, and sat for a few more minutes. Then he stood, and Draker heard his uneven footsteps heading toward the door. The doors hissed open and closed. Silence returned. Draker should have felt relieved. Instead, they felt more alone than before. The next evening, at the same time, the doors opened again. Same heavy, uneven footsteps. The human sat in the same spot, 3 meters away. He unpacked another meal and ate quietly, staring at the stars. When he finished, he left. This became a pattern. Every evening at the start of 3rd shift, the human maintenance worker appeared, sat near Draker, ate his meal, and left. He never spoke, never asked questions, never offered unwanted sympathy. He just existed in the same space, as if his presence required nothing from Draker in return. On the 5th evening, Draker broke first. "Why do you keep coming here?" The human looked over, his weathered face showing mild surprise. "Good view. Quiet. Nobody bothers me." He paused, then added, "You look like you could use some quiet too." The simple honesty of it struck Draker harder than any diplomatic rebuke. This human did not know who Draker was. He had not come to judge, or to console, or to advise. He had simply noticed another being in pain and decided to share space with them. "I am Draker," they said, their voice rough from disuse. "I am the diplomatic envoy for the Scale-Wing Dominion, tasked with brokering peace between three species. I have failed completely. Tomorrow I resign and return home in disgrace." The human nodded slowly. "Daniel Reeves. I fix things that break on the station. Air systems, mostly. Sometimes plumbing." He gestured at the window. "But I cannot fix that." "No one can," Draker said bitterly. "I have tried for 15 cycles. Every negotiation fails. Every compromise falls apart. The Chitauri will not trust anyone with a spine. The Lumini will not trust anyone who casts a shadow. My own people will not trust anyone who admits doubt. And I am tired. So tired of carrying this weight." Daniel listened without interrupting. When Draker finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. Then he said, "I was a soldier once. 20 years ago. We failed to protect some people we were supposed to keep safe. Half of them died because I was not good enough." Draker looked at him fully for the first time. "How do you live with that?" "Badly, for a long time," Daniel admitted. "Then someone told me something that helped. They said failure is guaranteed when you stop trying. But trying, even when you fail, that still matters. Because someone has to try." He stood up, his movements careful and deliberate. "Same time tomorrow." Draker stared at him, confused by the question. Why would this human want to return? What could he possibly gain from spending time with a failed diplomat who would soon be gone? But before Draker could ask, Daniel had already left. For the first time in weeks, Draker folded their wings properly before leaving the observation deck. Daniel returned the next evening, carrying the same battered container of food. He settled into his usual spot without ceremony, 2 seats away from where Draker had once again claimed the window. The Dragon diplomat had spent all day avoiding the decision to actually send that resignation letter. The send button had been pressed 17 times in their mind, but their claws had never quite touched the tablet screen. 3 days passed this way. Daniel appeared, ate, sat quietly, and left. Draker noticed details about him without meaning to. The way he always brought exactly enough food for one meal, nothing wasted. The careful way he moved his right leg, compensating for some old injury. The small, satisfied sound he made after the first bite of each meal, as if that simple food was the best thing he had ever tasted. On the 4th evening, Draker spoke without planning to. "Do you know what I did today? I attended a memorial service for 16 Chitauri soldiers who died in a supply depot raid. Then I attended another memorial for 8 Lumini civilians killed when a scale-wing warship fired on the wrong transport. Then I received a message from my own people celebrating those Lumini deaths as justified retaliation." Draker's voice cracked. "They want me to celebrate. They want me to say those dead civilians deserved it. And I just sit here, useless, watching numbers turn into bodies." Daniel finished chewing a bite of food before responding. "What do you want to happen?" "I want them to stop killing each other," Draker said, and the want in their voice was so raw it hurt. "I want to find the words that make them see each other as people instead of enemies. I want to broker a peace that lasts longer than a single news cycle. I want to stop failing." "Why do you think you are failing?" Draker gestured at the empty space around them. "Because the war continues. Because every treaty I propose gets rejected. Because both sides now hate me more than they hate each other. The Chitauri call me a scale-wing puppet. The Lumini say I am a Chitauri sympathizer. My own people call me weak and contaminated. I have united all 3 species in exactly one way. They all agree I am worthless." Daniel set down his food container. "Can I tell you about the worst day of my life?" Draker did not answer, but Daniel took that as permission to continue. "I was 32, sergeant in the Human Coalition Forces during the Frontier Wars. My unit got assigned to protect a convoy of civilian refugees fleeing a conflict zone. 300 people, mostly families, old folks and kids. We had 12 soldiers and 2 armored vehicles." Daniel's voice stayed level, but his hands tightened on his knees. "Raiders hit us in a canyon where we could not maneuver. They cut through our defensive line in under 4 minutes. We killed maybe 20 of them. They killed half our civilians before running off with the supply trucks." Draker listened, their breathing slow. I spent 6 years replaying that day, Daniel continued. Every decision I made, every position I chose, every order I gave. I found 1,000 ways I could have done better. Should have scouted ahead more carefully. Should have split the convoy. Should have called for air support earlier. Should have been faster, smarter, braver. The guilt nearly killed me. I stopped sleeping, stopped talking to my family. Spent 2 years in a bottle before the military medically discharged me. What changed? Draker asked quietly. I met a woman at a memorial service. Her name was Ruth. She lost her daughter in that convoy attack, a girl about 19 years old, studying to be a teacher. Daniel's throat worked. I saw her crying alone, and I could not help myself. I went over and told her I was sorry. Told her I failed her daughter. Told her if I had been better, her daughter would still be alive. What did she say? She hugged me, Daniel said, and his voice got thick. She said thank you. Said her daughter died, knowing someone tried to protect her. Said that mattered. Said her daughter's last words were about hoping the soldiers would be okay. He wiped his eyes roughly. She thanked me for trying, even though I failed. Draker felt something shift in their chest. But you did fail. The civilians died. Half of them died. Daniel corrected gently. Half of them lived. 150 people made it to safety because my unit stood between them and raiders for 4 minutes. 4 minutes was not enough to save everyone, but it was enough to save someone. And Ruth told me something else. She said her daughter would be ashamed if I stopped trying to protect people just because I could not protect everyone. The observation deck felt very small suddenly. Draker looked at their own reflection in the window, then at Daniel's beside it. You have been sitting between 3 species at war for 15 cycles, Daniel said. That matters. Even if you have not stopped the war yet. I have not stopped anything. I have only made it worse. Have you? Daniel picked up his food container again. You said both sides hate you now, but they used to hate only each other. Now, they have something else to focus on. Maybe that is not progress, but it is change. Change means things can still move. Draker wanted to argue, but the words would not come. They had spent so long measuring success by treaties signed and wars ended. They had never considered that simply continuing might be valuable in itself. Tell me about them, Daniel said. Not the governments or the militaries. The people, the Chitauri, the Lumini, your own scale wings. What are they actually like? And so Draker talked. They described Chitauri nesting customs and their complex scent-based language. They explained how Lumini experience time slightly differently than other species, which made negotiations challenging. They talked about scale-wing honor culture and how it sometimes trapped people in positions they hated. Daniel listened to everything, asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. Not diplomatic questions about strategic resources or alliance structures, but simple human curiosity. What did Chitauri children play with? What kind of music did Lumini enjoy? What did Scale Wings dream about? For the first time in cycles, Draker talked about the species they served as people instead of chess pieces. Draker's quarters had become a cave of neglect. Unwashed dishes formed small towers on every flat surface. Reports lay scattered across the floor in patterns that meant nothing. The air recycler wheezed because no one had cleaned the filter in months. Draker had stopped caring about such things around the same time they stopped believing peace was possible. Daniel appeared at the door one morning without warning. He knocked, waited 3 seconds, then knocked again with more insistence. Draker dragged themselves from a sleeping platform and opened the door halfway. You look terrible, Daniel said. Good morning to you too, Draker muttered. When did you last eat? Draker tried to remember and could not. Yesterday, maybe. The day before. Daniel made a disgusted sound and pushed past them into the quarters. He looked around at the mess, his expression unchanging, then turned back to Draker. Get cleaned up. Eat something. Then meet me at Dock 7 in 1 hour. Why? Because you've been sitting in the observation deck or these quarters for weeks, and it is making you crazy. You are coming with me on my maintenance rounds. I am a diplomat, not a maintenance worker. Right now you are neither, Daniel said bluntly. You are someone who has forgotten what the rest of the station looks like. 1 hour. Dock 7. He left before Draker could argue further. The dragon Diplomat stood among the ruins of their quarters and felt something unfamiliar stir. Annoyance, maybe, or curiosity. Either way, it was better than the numb despair that had filled the last few weeks. They cleaned up, forced down a ration bar, and made their way to Dock 7. Daniel waited with a toolkit and a work tablet. Good. You showed up. Come on. They walked through corridors Draker had not seen in months. The station felt different when viewed through a maintenance worker's eyes. Daniel pointed out things Draker had never noticed. A coolant line that ran too close to a heating duct, a lighting panel that flickered at irregular intervals, a deck plate that had come loose from its moorings. Their first stop was the Chitauri residential quarter. The insectoid species lived in smaller spaces with higher humidity than other areas. Daniel knocked on a door, and a young Chitauri opened it. They chittered something in their language, mandibles clicking rapidly. Air recycler making noise again. Daniel translated, though Draker spoke enough Chitauri to understand. Let me check it. Inside the small quarters, Daniel knelt beside the recycler unit and began disassembling it with practiced efficiency. The young Chitauri brought him a drink, some kind of fermented nectar that Chitauri preferred. Daniel accepted it politely, took a small sip, and made appreciative clicking sounds that sent the Chitauri into pleased chittering. You speak their language, Draker said, surprised. Badly, Daniel admitted while working. But they appreciate the effort. He pulled a component from the recycler, showed the Chitauri what was wrong, and installed a replacement. The unit hummed back to life smoothly. The Chitauri pressed a small wrapped package into Daniel's hands before they left. What is that? Draker asked in the hallway. Probably candy made from tree sap. They always give me some. Daniel pocketed it. Next stop, the pattern repeated through the day. Daniel fixed a water heater in a Lumini meditation chamber, while a crystal-formed being explained their gratitude in musical tones. He replaced worn seals on an airlock near the scale wing, while an elderly dragon watched and offered advice. He repaired a food processor in the human section, while a young family thanked him and insisted he take home leftovers. Draker noticed something strange. Daniel chatted with everyone, but never about anything important. He asked about families, about hobbies, about minor complaints, and small victories. He listened when a Chitauri worker complained about the temperature. He nodded when a Lumini artist showed him a new sculpture. He accepted a young Scalewing's excited explanation of their school project with genuine interest, and people responded to him. Not with the careful, calculated responses they gave diplomats, but with warmth, with trust, with the easy friendliness of someone talking to a neighbor. After the sixth repair, Draker finally asked, "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Get them to trust you. They barely know you, but they invite you into their homes. They give you gifts. They talk to you like a friend." Daniel packed his tools while considering the question. "I show up when I say I will. I fix what needs fixing. I do not ask for anything in return." He shrugged. Trust is not built with grand gestures. It is built in small moments, repeated consistently. The words hit Draker like a physical blow. They had spent 15 cycles focused on grand peace treaties, elaborate conferences, formal negotiations with dozens of protocols. They had never considered that trust might be built through simpler actions. What if, Daniel said slowly, as if working through an idea, what if you stopped trying to force peace from the top down? What if you started from the bottom up instead? I do not understand. These three species do not trust their leaders to make peace. But what if regular people got to know each other? Not as representatives or diplomats, but as individuals. Daniel gestured around at the station. You have all three species living here. What if you created opportunities for them to interact informally? No negotiations, no official protocols, just existing in the same space. Draker wanted to dismiss the idea immediately. It was too simple, too small, but they thought about the cultural exchange programs they had seen on other stations, about the way Daniel built trust through consistent small actions, about how the young Chitauri had offered him candy not because of any diplomatic protocol, but because he had fixed their air recycler and learned to click greetings properly. A cultural exchange evening, Draker said slowly. Small, informal. Food, music, art. No negotiations. Worth trying. Daniel said. Worst case, nothing happens. But you would be doing something instead of sitting in that observation deck, waiting for everything to collapse. Draker felt that unfamiliar stirring again. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The faint idea that maybe, just maybe, there was another way forward. I will need help organizing it, they said. Daniel smiled. I know a guy who fixes things. He might be available. The cultural exchange evening was scheduled for 3 days away. Draker spent those days in a state of controlled panic. They sent invitations to all 3 species, carefully wording them to emphasize the informal nature of the gathering. No official representatives required. No formalidades. No political discussions. Just an opportunity to share food, music, and art from each culture. The responses trickled in slowly. A few curious Chitauri. 2 Lumini artists. 3 younger scale wings who seemed more interested in the promised food than any cultural exchange. Daniel brought 5 humans from the maintenance crew. 12 people total for an event Draker had hoped would draw 50 the evening of the exchange. Draker arranged tables in one of the station's common rooms. They had obtained sample foods from each species, grain cakes from scale wing tradition, fermented fruit from Chitauri cuisine, crystallized mineral supplements that Lumini consumed, and various human dishes Daniel had helped select. A Chitauri had agreed to bring an instrument. A Lumini promised to demonstrate light sculpture. One of the humans said he played guitar. The Draker scales had turned 3 different shades of gray by the time the first guest arrived. A young Chitauri maintenance worker, Daniel knew. The insectoid stood in the doorway, antennae twitching nervously, clearly regretting their decision to come. Daniel walked over and clicked a greeting, and the Chitauri relaxed slightly. The first hour was brutal. People stood in separate clusters by species. The Chitauri whispered to each other in their clicking language. The Lumini hummed musical tones. The scale wings kept glancing at Draker, as if expecting formal remarks. The humans looked uncomfortable, like they had wandered into someone else's family dinner. Draker wanted to flee. This was worse than a failed negotiation. At least those had structure. This was just awkward silence, punctuated by nervous eating. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He walked over to the Chitauri musician, who held their instrument uncertainly, and asked them to play something traditional. The Chitauri clicked a nervous response, something about it being inappropriate without proper ceremony. Daniel shrugged and said it did not need to be perfect, just genuine. The Chitauri began playing. The instrument produced clicking melodies that created complex rhythms. It sounded nothing like human or scale-wing music, all percussion and rapid pattern shifts. Most of the room watched politely but without real interest. Then one of the Lumini moved closer. Their crystalline body began catching the rhythm, refracting light in patterns that synchronized with the clicking. The light danced across the walls in waves of color that somehow matched the music perfectly. The Chitauri noticed and began modifying their playing slightly, emphasizing certain beats. The Lumini adjusted their light patterns in response. Within minutes, they had created something together. Music and light weaving into an improvised performance neither could have achieved alone. The room watched, genuinely captivated. When the piece ended, the Chitauri and Lumini looked at each other with what might have been surprise. The Chitauri clicked something. The Lumini hummed a response. Neither spoke each other's language well, but they managed to communicate appreciation through gesture and tone. Food happened next. The scale-wing grain cakes drew interest from the humans, who found them similar to their own baked goods. A Lumini tried human chocolate and produced light patterns that Daniel said meant extreme pleasure. The Chitauri fermented fruit made everyone except other Chitauri grimace, but they laughed about it together. Draker watched from the side, afraid to interfere, afraid their diplomatic presence would remind everyone this was supposed to mean something. But Daniel caught their eye and gestured them over to try the human food. When Draker hesitated, he simply brought them a plate. "You organized this," he said quietly. "You should enjoy it. Nothing is solved." Draker whispered back. "The war continues. This changes nothing." "Look around," Daniel said. Draker looked. a young scale wing, was attempting to teach a human the proper wing posture for their traditional dance. Two Chitauri and Illumini were comparing their species' art forms, tried to explain through translation software and wild gesturing. One of the older humans was showing the Chitauri pictures of his grandchildren. 3 hours ago, these people would have walked past each other in hallways without speaking, Daniel continued. Now, they're exchanging contact information to collaborate on art projects. They're arguing good-naturedly about the best way to brew tea. They are laughing together. He looked at Draker. That is not nothing. The evening ended with promises to meet again. The Chitauri musician and Lumini light sculptor exchanged information to work on more performances together. Several people suggested making this a regular event, maybe weekly. One of the scale wings mentioned having a friend who would love to attend next time. After everyone left, Draker and Daniel cleaned up in silence. Draker's mind raced. Part of them wanted to immediately leverage this success into formal negotiations. Schedule a peace conference. Present this cultural exchange as evidence that cooperation was possible. Use the momentum to push for treaties. But another part remembered Daniel's word about trust being built through small, consistent actions, not grand gestures. What are you thinking? Daniel asked, reading Draker's expression. I am thinking about how to turn this into something bigger. Daniel stopped wiping down a table. Do not do that. What? Do not take one good evening and try to force it into a treaty. You will kill whatever started here. He resumed cleaning. Let it grow naturally. Organize another exchange next week. Then another. Let people build relationships without the weight of galactic politics crushing them. Give it time. I do not have time, Draker said, frustration breaking through. My government has given me one more cycle to achieve results. One cycle before they recall me. If I cannot show them something tangible, something that looks like progress, they will replace me with someone who will abandon this approach entirely. They sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Do you understand what that means? I have failed my species. I have failed the legacy of my family. Every generation of my line has served as diplomats, and I will be the one remembered for ending that tradition. My clutch sibling, who always said I was too soft for this work, will finally be proven right. And worst of all, people will keep dying while I talked and accomplished nothing. The anguish in Draker's voice filled the empty room. Daniel sat down across from them, his weathered face thoughtful. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Can I tell you what I see when I look at you? Draker said nothing, their dulled scales catching the dim light. I see someone who has carried an impossible burden for 15 cycles. I see someone who has not given up, even when giving up would be easier. I see someone who cares so deeply about peace that they have torn themselves apart trying to achieve it. That is not failure, Draker. That is courage. Courage that accomplishes nothing. Maybe you cannot accomplish it alone, Daniel said gently. Maybe the problem is not that you failed. Maybe the problem is that peace was never something one diplomat could deliver. What if it takes generations? What if you're just planting seeds that someone else will harvest years from now? Draker looked at him sharply. That is easy for you to say. You are not the one who will be recalled in disgrace. No, Daniel agreed. But I am the one who spent 6 years thinking I should have died instead of those civilians. I am the one who nearly ate a bullet because I could not forgive myself for failing people who trusted me. His voice stayed level, but his hands tightened. And I am here telling you that surviving your failure, continuing despite it, might be the most important thing you ever do. Because someone has to keep trying. Draker wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was too deep. They just sat there while Daniel cleaned up the rest of the room. The next week, Draker organized another cultural exchange. Attendance doubled. Word had spread from the first event. More people came curious about the music, the food, the chance to meet neighbors they normally avoided. The Chitauri musician brought 2 friends. The Lumini light sculptor brought their mentor. A scale-wing chef offered to teach others how to prepare traditional grain cakes. Draker noticed something during the second gathering. People who attended the first event seemed more comfortable. They greeted each other by name. They asked about each other's work. Small relationships were forming, tiny threads connecting individuals across species lines. But Draker also noticed who was not attending. The hardcore military personnel, the ideological extremists, the older generation who had lost too much to the war to imagine peace. These cultural exchanges reached the open-minded and the curious. They did not reach the people who needed to change most. Daniel found Draker standing apart from the crowd again. "What is wrong? This is going well." "It is not enough," Draker said. "We are preaching to the converted. The people who attend these events already want peace. We're not changing minds. We're just creating a bubble where like-minded people pat themselves on the back for being tolerant. So what do you want to do differently?" Draker thought about this. They thought about Daniel's maintenance rounds, about how he built trust through consistency. They thought about who might be receptive to a different message. "Veterans," Draker said slowly. "Soldiers who have actually fought in this war. They have seen the cost up close. They cannot be dismissed as naive or ignorant about the enemy. What if we created spaces specifically for them? For people who have served across all three species?" Daniel's expression shifted, became more serious. "That is harder. Veterans carry heavy weight. They will not come just for food and music." "No," Draker agreed. "But they might come if we acknowledge what they carry. If we create a space where they can speak honestly about what the war has taken from them." Over the next few weeks, Draker reached out carefully to veterans from all three species stationed on Harmony Point. The invitations were different this time. No mention of cultural exchange or peace building. Just an offer of space for those who had served to meet others who understood. The first veteran gathering had 6 people. A Chitauri who had lost their entire nest during a scale wing bombing. A Lumini medic who still saw the faces of those they could not save. 2 scale wing soldiers who had been dishonorably discharged for refusing certain orders. 2 humans who had served in other conflicts. The evening was nothing like the cultural exchanges. No music, no food displays. People sat in a circle and mostly stayed quiet. When someone spoke, it was in halting sentences about things that had no easy words. The Chitauri talked about coming home to find their nest destroyed. The Lumini described what it felt like to hold someone while they died, unable to help. One of the scale wings admitted they sometimes could not remember if the people they killed had been soldiers or civilians, and how that uncertainty haunted them. Daniel spoke too. He told the story Draker already knew about the convoy and the raiders and the guilt that almost destroyed him. But hearing it among other veterans gave it different weight. These people understood in ways Draker never could. Draker said nothing that evening. They listened, and they realized these veterans shared something beyond their species' loyalty. A bone-deep understanding of war's cost and a desperate wish that someone else could be spared it. The second veteran gathering had 10 people, then 15, then 20. Veterans began bringing friends who had served. They started meeting weekly, not at Draker's organization, but because they wanted to. The gathering stayed quiet and heavy, but bonds formed there that ran deeper than the friendships at the cultural exchanges. The Chitauri commander and a retired scale wing general began meeting separately to play chess. They barely spoke during the games, but afterward they talked about their regrets, their families, their exhaustion with war. Veterans began speaking differently to their own communities. They did not call for peace. That would have been dismissed as weakness. But they questioned the necessity of certain battles. They pushed back on propaganda that dehumanized the enemy. They quietly advocated for de-escalation. 3 months after the first veteran gathering, Draker received a message from an anonymous source within the Scale Wing Council. It was brief. "Minor clerk here. My brother attended your veteran meetings. He says it changed something in him. He can see enemies as people again. Keep going. Some of us are watching." That evening in the observation deck, Draker showed Daniel the message. "It is not much. It is evidence that the work matters," Daniel said. "That is more than you had 4 months ago." Draker looked at their reflection in the window. Their scales had regained some color. Not the brilliant emerald of their youth, but something closer to living green. "The war has not ended. My government still wants results I cannot give them. The work continues," Daniel said simply. "That is what matters. You keep showing up. You keep creating spaces for people to connect. You trust that small progress accumulates." Draker nodded slowly, feeling something they had not felt in cycles. Not quite hope, but but determination, the strength to continue, even without guarantees of success. 2 years passed like water through scales. The war continued in the broader galaxy, battles raging across disputed territories, peace talks stalling and restarting in endless cycles. By traditional diplomatic measures, nothing had changed. The Scale-Wing Council still sent Draker cold messages criticizing their unorthodox methods. The Chitauri government ignored their reports. The Lumini leadership pretended Harmony Point did not exist. But on the station itself, everything had changed. The cultural exchanges became permanent weekly events, attended by hundreds. A Chitauri and a Lumini had opened a collaborative art studio. 3 mixed-species sports leagues operated on regular schedules. The veteran gatherings had spawned support networks that connected former soldiers across all 3 species. Draker walked through station corridors and heard multiple languages mixing naturally, saw neighbors who once avoided eye contact, now stopping to chat. Draker scales had returned to their proper emerald shade. Their wings folded correctly. They still carried weight, but it felt different now. Not the crushing burden of impossible expectations, but the steady weight of meaningful work. Daniel found them in the observation deck one evening, though Draker no longer came here brood. Now, it was just a place with a good view where they sometimes wanted to think. My contract finishes next week, Daniel said without preamble. I'm heading back to Earth. Draker felt something twist in their chest. They had known this was coming. Maintenance contracts lasted 2 years, and Daniel had already extended his once. But knowing did not make it easier. I never properly thanked you, Draker said, for saving my life. I did not save your life. You did. I was ready to resign, ready to go home and spend the rest of my existence being reminded of my failure. You gave me a reason to continue. Daniel shook his head. I just sat with you. You did all the real work. You found your own strength. You taught me what strength looks like, Draker insisted. I thought strength meant never failing, never showing weakness, always having the right answer. You showed me that real strength is continuing after you fail. It is admitting when you do not know. It is asking for help. It is showing up every day to do small things that might never be enough, and doing them anyway because they matter. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. Then he smiled slightly. You know what is funny? You taught me something too. I spent 20 years convincing myself I was done trying to make a difference. Just a maintenance guy keeping his head down, not getting involved. But watching you refuse to give up, even when everything told you to quit, that reminded me why trying matters. Even when we fail, especially when we fail, trying matters. They sat in comfortable silence, watching ships arrive and depart from the station's docks. Small lights moving through the vast dark. What do you do now? Daniel asked. Keep going, Draker said. The Scale-Wing Council gave me an official reprimand last month for abandoning proper diplomatic protocols. But they also quietly extended my posting here indefinitely. I think some members see value in what we have built, even if they cannot say so publicly. And the war, still happening, still killing people. Draker's voice held old pain, but also acceptance. But there are signs, small ones. A ceasefire proposal gaining support in the Chitauri Parliament. Lumini religious leaders calling for reconciliation. Veterans on all sides pushing their governments toward de-escalation. Nothing certain, nothing guaranteed, but possible. Daniel stood, his movements still careful with that old leg injury. That is all anyone can ask for. Possibility. 3 months after Daniel left, Draker received a message marked urgent from the Scale-Wing Council. Their claws trembled as they opened it, expecting another reprimand or perhaps the final recall order. Instead, they found something unexpected. The Scale-Wing Council, under sustained pressure from a coalition of veterans and civilians who had participated in Harmony Point programs, had proposed a limited ceasefire in the Outer Reach territories. The Chitauri government, facing similar internal pressure, had agreed to preliminary talks. The Lumini had sent observers. It was not peace. It was not even a full treaty. Just a ceasefire in one contested region, fragile and temporary. But it was movement. And it had come not from diplomatic maneuvering, but from ordinary people demanding it. The seeds planted on Harmony Point were finally showing visible growth. Draker sent a message to Daniel on Earth. The war has not ended. But today, in one small region, people who were shooting at each other yesterday are sharing space without violence. Small progress, but progress. Thank you for teaching me to value small progress. Daniel's reply arrived 3 days later. Proud of you, friend. The work continues. That is what matters. The work continues, and we continue with it. Draker read the message 3 times, then saved it in their personal files along with other important documents. Evidence that trying mattered. Evidence that small actions accumulated into change. That evening, Draker went to the observation deck for the weekly veteran gathering. 23 former soldiers attended, representing all 3 species. They sat in their usual circle, sharing the weight they carried. As the gathering ended, Draker noticed a young Lumini lingering near the entrance. They looked lost, their crystalline form dim with distress. Draker recognized that expression, the look of someone carrying too much weight alone. The Lumini was a newly assigned junior diplomat, posted at Harmony Point to assist with the ceasefire negotiations. They looked overwhelmed, defeated before even beginning. Draker remembered sitting in this same observation deck 2 years ago, scales dull with despair, claws trembling on a resignation letter. They remembered Daniel choosing to sit nearby, asking nothing, offering only quiet presence. The young Lumini noticed Draker watching and straightened, trying to look professional. Ambassador Draker, I apologize for intruding. I did not mean to disturb your gathering. You are not disturbing anything, Draker said gently. They gestured to a chair near the window, not too close. The view is good here. Quiet. Nobody bothers you. The Lumini hesitated, then slowly sat down. They stared out at the stars, their form trembling slightly with suppressed distress. Draker sat 2 seats away and said nothing more. Just existed in the same space, asking nothing in return. Sometimes that was where hope began. In quiet presence. In refusing to let someone carry their weight alone. In showing up consistently, even when outcomes remained uncertain. The work continued, and they would continue with it.